everybody. Welcome to another episode of What a Hell of a Way to Die. It's Francis, and I have back with me Davis Winkie, writer for Army Times and many other places. Davis, how are you doing today?
I am doing great, Francis. It's a great whatever day of the week it is today.
It is Wednesday. It's been a long time since I've forgotten what days of the week it was. I think last time I did was when I took like a week off of work and then didn't go anywhere. So it is Wednesday today. I think, yeah, it's Wednesday. See, I don't fucking know, man.
Now I have you doubting reality.
I'm always down in reality, man. That's what happens when you smoke weed as much as I do. So Davis, I brought you on because I wanted to talk about this ongoing saga. I've talked to you. I think I've brought you on at least twice before for specifically the U.S.-Mexico border and Operation Lonestar. And you recently had a article come out along with the Texas Tribune, which is a paper down there in Texas that also has been covering. They're nonprofit, I believe, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you did Army Times, you and Texas Tribune did some work. Here it is. Texas guardsmen spied on migrants via WhatsApp and mishandled secret documents. And senior leaders allegedly ignored oversight officials' concerns. So before we jump into this, if you're just joining us or if you're not too up on what's going on and on the Texas border, kind of give us an idea of what exactly is Operation Lonestar.
Yeah, man. Since March of 2021, the state of Texas has been running its own border mission to secure the Texas-Mexico border. In the eyes of Governor Greg Abbott, who has ordered and controlled the mission, it's an effort to do what the Biden administration purportedly isn't, which is take meaningful action to stem the flow of human trafficking, drug trafficking, and if you're a Sicario 2 fan, terrorists coming across the border.
Yeah, all those prayer rugs in the Mexico desert.
Yeah,
I remember that.
There was a frustrated line I wrote about that in one like records request appeal to the Texas AG, where I was arguing against the Texas military department, saying that the terrorists would win if I got the requested documents. But that's well, let's set that aside. Okay, so in March of 21, this border mission launches, and I want to be clear, Francis. Like, there are other border missions. There have been in the past. There will be today. There will be in the future. Hell, the border was where the National Guard was almost born, more or less.
Yeah, I did a long time ago interview an Air Force airman that was stationed on the border at the time. And this was before loans. This is before, I believe, everything kind of went haywire with, the way that we do things. And he said that, like, he's just like, we monitor and that's it. And then we feed information to like the local police and or the local CBP. And that's it. Their role was we monitor. If we see something, we tell Border Patrol. They send a truck out to pick them up. That's it. That's all that they were doing. It seems now they're doing a little bit more though. Lonestar is Border Patrol kind of on just cranked up to 11 here.
Yeah. So the reason why previous National Guard or active duty border missions have been limited to mostly a observe and report role, as your previous interviewee correctly described, is there are legal restrictions on the way that you can use federal military forces. You can't use them to enforce laws. That dates back to the Posse Comitatus Act, which came about after the collapse of Reconstruction in the 19th century, where one of the safeguards that the Redeemers, they were called, the folks who supported the end of Reconstruction, wanted was a legal firewall against the U.S. military being used for law enforcement, as it had been across the South during Reconstruction. And so that constraint actually means that when you have active duty troops there, they can't actively do law enforcement.
That's interesting. That means that Confederate sympathizers are the ones who said, no, the military can't be used for police actions.
Yeah, man. The legal structure that the National Guard is built on and the reasons why it's used the way it is are A huge rabbit hole. But when guardsmen are on state active duty, as Texas has done here, basically you're taking federally trained, federally equipped personnel, but calling them up as the state militia and making them temporary state employees, even though they still wear U.S. Army or U.S. Air Force on their chest and have the camo and all the big guns and stuff if they're authorized to carry them. They are, legally speaking, not the military when they're on a mission like Lone Star. And Lone Star is the largest known use of guardsmen on state duty for a sustained mission as opposed to disaster response that we're tracking in the modern era.
Yeah, you call up your National Guard for a couple weeks at a time because you need to mobilize people for civil unrest or flooding, as we do here in St. Louis. Every time it floods, we got to get some Missouri National Guardsmen out to chuck sandbags around and stuff. But yeah, it's a small, like, we need you guys, come on out here for like 2 weeks and then you can go back to whatever you're doing.
Exactly. Usually you're either federal military activated and deployed overseas or doing big federal military training, or you're doing basically this almost state paramilitary stuff where you're helping with disaster response or riot response or something along those lines. But Operation Lone Star instead has taken that state militia status and just amped it up. And so when Greg Abbott was facing primary challengers on the right in the fall of 2021, his border mission expanded by several thousand troops who were called up involuntarily, many on short notice. And then when they showed up on the border, select units of them were given arrest authority. And even though immigration enforcement is technically a federal thing, the state entered agreements with private landowners along the border that allowed the state troopers and guardsmen to arrest migrants for trespassing on private land after they crossed the border. And this scheme has really been at the core of what Operation Lone Star is. It's about
this is like a giant American HOA at this point. Like, just busting somebody for trespassing on private property is that's just the most bitchy thing that I've ever heard us do so far.
Well, in what I'll say, Francis, is that, like, for a while now there have been extremely high levels of migration at the U.S.-Mexico border, and in some cases it's devolved into like true scenes of humanitarian crisis. If we think back to things like 15,000 Haitians streaming across the river in Del Rio in the fall of 2021. Leading to images of that massive encampment under the international bridge there. There is growing consensus that something has to give. However, our country is sharply polarized on what has to give and how to address it in the interim. The way some Democrats have put it to me in the past is, like, every dollar you spend on sending the Guard there would be way more useful creating more customs officers. And you'll have Republicans say, no, we need to harden the border. We need to militarize it. And we need to, because the feds won't, Greg Abbott will. And, that's kind of where it stands there. And this mission has endured, despite there being massive problems at first with pay being broken, living conditions being trashed for the troops there. They struggled to adequately field equipment, including life-saving equipment along a river where people drown with just regularity. And this most recent story is part of a trend that we've seen over the course of a nearly 2-year reporting partnership with the Tribune at this point. And it's the fact that using the state militia status, state active duty, at such an unprecedented scale has led to unprecedented problems that stem from the inadequacy of the state bureaucracy to handle things at such a scale for such a long period of time. The system was not designed to do this. The system was designed for short-term disaster responses, or basically just to babysit people when they're not under federal control. And it was those administrative and bureaucratic bottlenecks that led to some of those problems I described. But what our most recent investigation has found is that intelligence personnel found themselves in what they perceived to be uncharted territory, without clear guidance from superiors, without clear guidance from oversight officials. And the net effect was that these guys on the border just did their own thing without much coordination with other agencies, and while arguing to the death with their oversight officials that the regulations that constrain them actually didn't apply because they were in a state status. And honestly, Francis, some of this is an open question.
Yeah, I did notice, like, reading through here, there's a lot of conversations about, like, what can and can't we do, and it's like, well, you can't, especially when it comes to intelligence gathering, which it seems like your story kind of revolves around, is how legally can people gather intelligence when they're not necessarily part of a federal investigation or a federal body of things. And of course, the argument being that you don't want, like, a state should not have a surveillance apparatus. Like, the federal government really shouldn't either, but we kind of allow it for, it makes us safe or whatever. But, as soon as you allow a state to do that, that opens up a whole different can of worms, right? Like, and it seems like, if we start talking about your story here, it seems like intel gathering is really what this kind of encircles. And there's a lot of intel gathering that's done in very, like, I understand where their arguments are of, yes, we want to be able to infiltrate these these groups that are the smugglers and people who are bringing the stuff across the border. But, like, I understand your reasoning. You still can't do that, though, like, without all kinds of oversight, because you're gonna fuck something up, basically. Like, there's no coming back from, like, I guess it reminds me a lot of Guantanamo, like, how we really cannot charge anybody in Guantanamo Bay with anything because we tortured all of them. There's just no coming back from that. We tortured them in one way or another. That makes everything they've ever said inadmissible. And America is just like, well, shit, I guess we're just going to have to do this until they all die in prison because we can't admit that we made a mistake. It feels like this has the same implications of, like, the way that you did this means that all of this gets thrown out of admissible evidence. And also you're going to go to jail for doing it.
And while it may not escalate to the level of people going to jail in this specific instance, there was a sense between my sources, between some of the implicated officers who actually spoke with me on the record or provided extensive statements through their attorneys, that everybody was very uncomfortable with the gray area that they perceived they were in, because, these guys are federally trained. They're used to working under federal authorities where there are very, very clearly defined oversight rules and procedures. Those procedures and oversight rules are in place, of course, because the Army spied on anti-war activists through the 60s and 70s and was just dishing out this illegally gathered information on activists to law enforcement left and right, or leaking it in some cases to the press to get people publicly discredited. There was truly a rogue, federally controlled domestic intelligence operation during the 60s and 70s that led, of all administrations, the Reagan administration, to codify strict oversight rules to prevent it from happening again. And these intel officers are used to working in that world. But when they become state militiamen, they are now in the world of law enforcement intelligence, which has much blurrier rules depending on what systems you're using, who's funding that system. Are you trying to get something admissible in court? Are you just trying to have threat awareness? Are you coordinating with the feds? Have you deconflicted this operation with, say, the FBI or Border Patrol or Homeland Security investigations? The rules in law enforcement intelligence work are so different from the rule book that these guys have drilled into their heads from federal duty that nobody knew what would fly and what wouldn't. And ultimately, the implicated officers told me their commanders wanted them to push through it anyways. And in their eyes, these guys think they were hung out to dry, despite expressing their concerns over whether some of these operations were legal or not.
Which, I get that. I understand that argument, but also if you're sitting here saying, "Hey, this is illegal," and the general tells you to do it anyway, you're still doing the illegal thing. You can. And look, I was in the Army, of course. Obviously, it's difficult when you're being told when like legally it's a binding order, but also you're like, but I think this is illegal. But if I go against it, I'm going to be punished here. And when does actual punishment come down? It is a career ender to say no to something like that. However, you should say no to something like that regardless and go get a different career. I am sympathetic. I'm always sympathetic to people being hung out to dry by the top brass, but at the same time, like I said, if you know that it's wrong and you're still doing it, then you're in the wrong. Or at least what you got to do is say, "Hey, give me those orders in writing and sign your name to it." I have found that is that's a fun one to deploy on a captain who does not like you. There are there's so many ways to piss off officers in a very legal way, and you gotta lean on what you've got. So I feel like that could have been hey, look, what you're asking us to do is illegal, and I need you to put your name on it. And I feel like that could have probably helped out a little bit. It sounds like this is all just kind of broken open here, and we're waiting for the eventual fallout and who's going to get charged with what. Correct?
Exactly. We really don't know yet what the long game of this is going to be. But you raise the question of what's put in writing and where. And to briefly talk about how we put this investigation together. I've been following this storyline since sources started, telling me of rumors and whispers that something was going wrong with the intelligence work on the border all the way back in the spring of last year in 2022. And since then, we've been working to develop sources who knew what happened. We've been working to have documents leaked to us related to it, or we got hundreds and hundreds of pages of documents through the Texas Public Information Act, some of which we had to, appeal to the Texas Attorney General's office to receive because the military department wasn't exactly keen on handing over these documents. And when we got them, they were very, very heavily redacted, but I thankfully had sources to help me get through them. And what we found in those documents was a whole lot of people putting a lot of things in writing in very explicit terms because they weren't sure. And they wanted to make sure that they had covered their own asses. They wanted to make sure that the record reflected who had told them to do what and when, who had expressed what concerns to whom and when, and who said they were going to assume the risk for something, which, as we both know, is in kind of an empty phrase, but one that a lot of people believe in. And we built this investigation based off of a lot of those records. And it just really showed us the fact that these guys did not know where they were in relation to laws and regulations, and just kept doing it anyways.
Sure. And the entirety of Operation Lonestar has sounded like a lot of people being fed shit and kept in the dark. Whether it be the regular troops kind of patrolling the border, what they're supposed to do, how they're supposed to be able to do it, the things that they are and aren't allowed to do. Like I said, the airman that I talked to is very like, we can do this and we can do that, and then we send it over there, and that's it. That's all we're allowed to do. But like all the stories that you've done, and that I know Texas Tribune's done, and a few other people have reported on with Operation Lonestar, it really feels like the concept of just if we don't tell them everything, they'll go ahead and do whatever we want, whether it's legal or not. Seems to be kind of the way that they operate down there, regardless.
Honestly, man, a lot of the stuff that played out here shocked people that I talked to, especially people who are intelligence officials in other organizations. They just could not comprehend that people didn't throw the brakes on this work when they realized they weren't comfortable with where it stood legally. Um,
Yeah, I feel like probably when we talk about intelligence gathering and spying and things, people in America generally have this idea of the NSA tapping our phones just for funsies. And like it's not like that. Like there are a lot of checks and balances that you have to go through to be able to do something like that. You have to have reason for it. You have to be able to say, here's why we're doing it. Here's the things that we have found from this person. And here's why we want to monitor, this one thing that we can monitor their phone and that's it. Anything else that we want to monitor, we have to go through the whole system again. And for somebody, I never worked in Intel, so I don't know how these operations work. I am repeating that because of what I've read here. Is that like, oh, it sounds like there is a lot that goes into Intel gathering just from the legal basis of can we and how do we, not necessarily the cool pen cameras or whatever that we see in James Bond. There's just a lot of paperwork to kind of hit through it, and it going through here and just what you said there, it sounds like not only did a lot of people know that there's a specific ways that this should be done, but they are realizing that they're not being done.
And what stands out here is that even if there are ways to short circuit the oversight procedures and privacy safeguards put on federal intelligence work, which privacy advocates, including some that I spoke with for this story, say, they say that there are abuses of this stuff with the feds all the time. But
100%.
at least there are
100%.
procedures that they have to figure out how to get around.
Yeah, and if they get caught, there's there's legal hopefully there's legal ramifications. But it's not just the CIA is not just throwing stuff out there and seeing what sticks. They have things to go through. And of course, this is not to excuse anybody for spying on you. That's all directly against the Fourth Amendment, regardless. But at least there are, the government doesn't do things like this without there being a big manual on how to do it. Like we were in the Army. Like you've read AR 670-1, right? Of course not. Nobody has, because that's an insane. The only person who has is like when you become an E7 or above, it just gets like low jacked into your brain like the Matrix. But AR 670-1 is the wear of the Army uniform. We have very specific directions on how to do everything, because if we don't, some dum-dum's going to come in and be like, I don't know what I'm doing, which is fine. Here's the manual. It tells you exactly everything to do. Do the things that the manual says and you'll be fine. Do anything the manual doesn't say, you're going to be doing push-ups and peeling potatoes on KP.
Yeah, more or less. And one of the things about this story is that the regulatory confusion and the gray area and potential like long-term consequences, because my sources came to me because they were worried that this operation could provide a model for other governors to weaponize federally trained intelligence personnel to enforce state laws. And, state laws passed by state legislatures often reflect the politics and priorities of those politicians. And not to dig too far into that, but I think that they have some valid concerns there. But when you get down to brass tacks about this, Francis, like this story is bonkers. This story like belongs in a like C-grade spy movie that I sell the rights to Lifetime for a $2 bill and a pack of Hubba Bubba, and exclusively airs between the hours of 2 and 4 a.m., never to see the light of day.
If you add some like really pretty people who have very straight white teeth, this could be a Hallmark movie.
Honestly, man, we just need to like take some creative license to add a love interest. Or maybe there was one that we're not tracking. But let
Yeah,
me set the
falling in
scene
love
for you
across the
here.
border.
Let me set the scene for you here, man. So you've got this Border Intelligence Directorate, um, and there's four main characters in this story. One of them, the leader of the Intel Directorate, he's the night lieutenant for the Austin Police Department. You know, career civil servant, been in the Guard a really long time, is known for trying to dot his I's and cross his T's. His deputy director of Intel underneath him volunteered for Operation Lonestar the same month that he was forced to resign from the San Antonio Police Department when his third road rage incident in a 4-year span led to DWI charges. To be clear, those charges have since been dropped, and this guy was not charged in either the first two road rage incidents, but this guy had pending criminal charges when he volunteered for Operation Lonestar and became the deputy director of intelligence. He was also a major, so say what you will about field grade officers.
And we do constantly. But go ahead.
The third main character here is a first lieutenant, an officer who was an immigrant from Haiti, born in 1978. He was an interpreter for U.S. and UN personnel in Haiti before immigrating to the U.S. on a student visa. This guy enlists in the army. He gets his citizenship. He gets an education. He gets out. He rejoins the Texas Guard later on. He becomes an intelligence officer. And this guy has command of several languages. He's got an interesting background. And he found his native speaking command of Haitian Creole to be in large demand when 15,000 Haitians streamed across the Rio Grande in the fall of 2021. And then our fourth character here is a guy who his day job is as an intel analyst at the FBI's El Paso field office, but he moonlights with two part-time careers. One of them is as a human intelligence warrant officer in the Texas National Guard, and his second part-time career is as an actor, where he's been trying to basically become a movie star or TV star for law enforcement themed thrillers for more than a decade. The guy was even an extra in Friday Night Lights back in the day. So
Yeah, I get the writers and actors strike hits us all hard, I guess.
And these guys are at the core of this story. So in the fall of 21, after the Haitians come across the border into Del Rio, according to documents and emails we reviewed, the Haitian lieutenant is requested to serve as an interpreter and translator for Border Patrol or state troopers in Del Rio. The caveat to this, of course, is that Border Patrol, through an anonymous spokesperson, denied to us that they had requested this guy, even though the emails pretty clearly say that somebody had asked for him. We're not sure exactly what happened while he was in Del Rio, but some accounts of it say that, he dressed in civilian clothes and was doing, quote, clandestine style interviews with people trying to gather intelligence for the border mission. But everybody agrees that this lieutenant came back from Del Rio with a burner phone. And that burner phone had access to WhatsApp groups. The WhatsApp, the popular messaging application that is used by a whole lot of people around the world and is frequently used by migrants to coordinate their travels to the U.S. This guy had access to a bunch of WhatsApp chats with migrants and smugglers. They were in English, they were in Spanish, they were in Creole, you name it. And purportedly, they started gathering intelligence from these chats, looking for things like the migrants' plans and intentions. Are there any maps that are guiding them? What techniques are the migrants and smugglers going to use?
How many members of ISIS are with you?
Oh my God, man! I don't even want to talk about that.
How much Al Qaeda is with you here?
Well, here's the dirty little secret about the numbers of quote unquote terrorists who come across the southern border. Because the way that the National Terrorist Screening Database has evolved to include people engaged in certain kinds of transnational crime, there are a lot of like cartel officials who are now like strictly speaking on terrorist watch lists within that database, even though it's not like the kind of to borrow an old buzz phrase, it's not radical Islamic terrorism. These guys would count towards the terrorist caught column if they were found crossing the border. So putting that
more, you get more XP when you get those guys.
Seemingly so. Like great value terrorists, I suppose. According to contemporaneous emails and one of the officers implicated in this who spoke with me, the Operation Lonestar deputy commander purchased the burner phone for the Haitian lieutenant. And from there, the deputy commander tasked the major, our road rage ex-cop friend, to oversee this operation using a computer that was linked to the lieutenant's WhatsApp account. The major tasked a specialist to help translate messages from there, and basically just fed info into the Operation Lonestar intel analysis cycle. State intelligence officials learned about what these guys were purportedly doing, and so did their peers. And their peers started reporting it as questionable intelligence activity. QIA is a very special kind of whistleblower report that in a traditional intelligence organization is basically like, pulling the fire alarm in an aircraft hangar. It sprays foam all over everything and like drowns people in cancer-causing chemicals, and nothing can happen until you address it. Obviously, pulling the QIA fire alarm won't give everybody cancer, but it usually will result in ops being shut down, devices being taken, and a thorough investigation before anything can continue. But what kept that from happening, at least immediately in Texas, was the fact that these guys were on state active duty rather than being federally activated intelligence personnel. And the argument over which rules applied to whom and when kept the state, through its state intelligence oversight office, from being able to exercise effective oversight of these guys. And that part of that, according to the officers who spoke with me about this, and they spoke under their names with me for this story, they said it was because their commanders said, we're doing this anyways, or they, at a minimum, turned a blind eye to the concerns that oversight officials raised. The pressure on this mounts over time, with one key moment being on February 1st of 2022, when 3 of our 4 characters, our lieutenant colonel, our major with the pending DWI charges, and our human intelligence collector with an acting habit, visit with Homeland Security Investigations personnel in El Paso. I've spoken with 2 of those 3 men. They don't deny that this meeting happened. They do, however, dispute the version of events that a whistleblower gave in a sworn statement later. The whistleblower said that these guys presented a list of names to federal agents in that meeting and said, hey, we've been running this WhatsApp operation, and here's a list of approximately 90 names that you should be investigating. And, we'd appreciate it if you could help us find out more about these people. And the feds purportedly shut that shit down. The quote from the whistleblower's sworn statement attributed it by name to the intelligence chief of that HSI office, saying, quote, HSI is not an HSI is an investigative agency, not an intelligence agency. And About a week and change later was when the whistleblower, who was one of the attendees of that meeting, by the way, not one of our three main characters, but there were more Texans that got dragged along into the room. One of the people in the room reported it as another QIA. And that's roughly when the Texas Military Department called in National Guard Bureau Intel oversight officials for help investigating this through the Inspector General. We don't have a ton of visibility on how that investigation went and played out. We do know through a partial summary of it provided to me by one of the accused officers, the major, that the Inspector General ultimately ruled that the WhatsApp work was an unauthorized foreign intelligence operation and faulted the major and the lieutenant for it. We don't know, like, nobody has a copy of this report in full outside the IG's office, to my knowledge. Not even the commanders of the Texas National Guard have it, they told me. So we don't know if other people were faulted by the IG for the WhatsApp operation. But what we do know is that it got shut down pretty quick in the wake of that meeting, and that eventually the people who were involved in it were sent home from the border mission. And since then, they've been flagged for investigation and had their clearances suspended. But there's a side plot. The side plot is that our friend, the warrant officer, who, as we recall, worked by day in the El Paso FBI office, managed to get his civilian workplace to invite him and another Texas Guardsman to come embed there as Operation Lonestar representatives. From there, these guys were purportedly like tapping into law enforcement intelligence and providing like authorized summaries of it back to Operation Lonestar.
See, when we were just talking about we've tricked some guys into a WhatsApp group and we got some names, like illegal, sure, but like not scary illegal.
Well, we
like
don't even know if it's illegal, man. That's the crazy part.
Right. It should be, but also something like that, that's kind of small time. This is somebody, however, who is using his position to really like ramp up the surveillance that they can do, not that they're allowed to do, because they're not allowed to do any of it. And it's very strange that the FBI allowed that.
Well, and I want to be really precise with my attribution here. We have an internal incident report from the Texas Military Department that states that the team that was embedded in El Paso may have accessed FBI classified intel systems and passed classified intelligence in a product back to their colleagues on Operation Lonestar using, of all things, Microsoft Teams.
Oh, they can't even use... Like, just use WhatsApp. That's encrypted. You were already there. You're already logged in, man.
And very quickly after that allegation was made, those people were kicked out of El Paso. They came under investigation, and we don't know what's come of it. The FBI refused to give me an update on this guy's status. The Texas Military Department did not address it at all in their communications with me. We really have no idea what consequences, if any, have come from basically classified FBI intel being passed back to the border mission. Hell, we don't even know for certain if it was on purpose or not. But nobody could give me a straight answer on whether this guy was trying to do his civilian and military jobs at the same time, which when you're doing intelligence work, you might want to strongly consider keeping your worlds separate.
Yeah, especially when one is Federal Bureau of Investigation and the other one is a state-run thing. Like it feels like, hey, we can. I bet if we go into the office, I can get some better stuff for us. And like whether or not he was doing that as a in good faith or not, still kind of fucked up.
And ultimately here, those guys were in El Paso did not even have a signed memorandum of understanding, like with the FBI. Like they were just there on a handshake agreement. And when things like intelligence and access to classified information are the kinds of things that were going to be hashed out in the agreement, sending them there on a handshake was, well, in the eyes of at least one guy, another QIA, Some guy filed a 5-page memorandum for record, perfectly formatted with screenshots and everything, arguing that them being there on a handshake agreement was illegal.
It's, I mean, it's not only is it illegal, but it's dangerous. Like, there are times when just at my job, which is not a important job whatsoever, I know the difference between if I send somebody a message in Teams versus I send a message to them in through email. One creates a paper trail and the other one doesn't. So I know that, like, if I'm doing emailing, I am saying, hey, I am creating a paper trail for this. We're going to I because I might have to show this to somebody. But a handshake agreement, that's the Teams message. That's the in my company, our Teams messages disappear after 72 hours or so, and that is just incredibly dangerous to do. Like, especially something like this of like, yeah, we'll back you up.
Well, and
I'm not going to take that one.
going back to the bureaucratic incompetence line that we've drawn through all of our reporting on Operation Lone Star, the FBI drafted an MOU. There was an MOU drafted and waiting for signature in the command hall at the Texas Military Department. But it just kept getting like lost, misplaced. The top general got unceremoniously forced to retire and replaced last year.
It happens a lot down there on the border. A lot of people forced to leave for some reason.
There might be a pattern or something. But
it's almost as if, like, when you're just like, shit, I got fired from my job, I guess I'll go work Lone Star. That doesn't make me feel good about everybody else who's down there.
And as this was just another effect of the bureaucracy not being ready or prepared for what it meant to do intelligence the right way while on state duty. And it's important to distinguish with that because there are some Texas guardsmen who were on Operation Lone Star who were embedded with law enforcement task forces under memoranda of understanding who did damn good work. There's a joint FBI and Homeland Security Investigations task force called Blue Indigo that operates out of, I'm not certain where, but I want to say that it's the Fusion Center in Laredo, Texas, which is kind of a nerve center for a lot of border-related intel work. And Blue Indigo, with the help of some Texas guardsmen who are there, in addition to all these other law enforcement agencies, has been nabbing cartel dudes left and right, hitting them with weapons charges, trafficking charges. Blue Indigo was involved in taking down the deputy head of one of the cartels recently. And those guys were there under a signed memorandum of understanding, under signed non-disclosure agreements on the certain parts of their work that couldn't be discussed outside of those office settings. And it showed in the results that they got.
Yeah, I'm sure they also probably had a, like, these are our targets, not like a bunch of like refugees coming across the border. We're not worried about that. We're worried about, as you're saying, cartel members, which, yes, fuck those guys, get them. But this is, again, the difference between, like, I have a clear job here and things that I do versus just go out there and be present and see what happens.
Yeah.
And that's Operation Lone Star.
And let's talk Fallout. Let's talk Fallout, because we had to work very, very hard to piece this picture together from records, from source interviews, from records provided to me by some of the implicated officers themselves here. Nobody has a full picture yet of what happened here. Not even the Texas Military Department. Probably the only group that does is the National Guard Bureau Inspector General. And we don't know yet what all of their findings were. And we also don't know whether they were aware of the role that senior officials may have had in sanctioning this operation. And while our four main characters are facing interim administrative punishment, their personnel records are flagged, which means they can't promote, get awards, etc. Francis, you know what that means. Not all of our loyal listeners might. So
yeah, it's a big thing that puts your career on hold.
Yeah, and you get flagged while you're waiting for the other shoe to drop, typically.
I
And
got flagged because I didn't pass a PT test, but then I passed one and I'm fine. I didn't break federal law.
yeah, you were not flagged for a commander's investigation
No.
while the Military Times was writing a 4,000-word story about you.
Yes, I was flagged because I was a fat body.
Which, like is respectable in a way. Good job
Hey,
getting the health insurance to
reservists,
take
man.
care of that.
Yeah, we're part timers. What do you want me to do? Go run on my off days? Fuck off.
Yeah, but the upshot of this is that nobody's punishment is final. None of the findings of these investigations have been officially acknowledged one way or another. We only know because of what we've been able to piece together. And so we're going to keep tracking it. But what I will note for the road is that there are some members of Congress who are asking the Justice Department to investigate this. And what I'll say about that is I don't know what grounds for an investigation there is, because the experts I spoke with are pretty sure that while these operations broke the rules, they may not have per se been illegal. I would need another hour and a half to try to explain that, and it still wouldn't make sense. But intelligence oversight, according to the former IG of the entire intelligence community, who I spoke with for this story, has a whole bunch of rules that are, quote, overlapping and arcane. And, a lot of people don't even know when they're breaking them.
Right. And it just creates a chance to do loopholes, quote, accidentally, but also going forward, if say everybody is kind of let off the hook because it's like, well, you didn't do anything illegal, this kind of opens up the door for them to do whatever they want going forward with investigation. And the problem being with that, again, go back to my Guantanamo example, is that when you do it wrong, you screw up everything that you're doing to get this person. And if you're not doing it right and you don't know how to do it right, you're going to fuck it up. So even if you do like, oh, we nabbed a cartel guy, but we did it because we catfished him through WhatsApp without any government oversight, that guy's going to go home. He's going to leave and he's going to know not to answer those you up messages that he gets on WhatsApp. But it does. A precedence needs to be set. Like rules need to be put down to say, here's how you do this, and that way, if like if I go this direction, I'm fucking it up. But if I go this direction, I'm fine. And that's really what I'm worried about is a lack of any kind of going forward, a lack of, I don't want to say oversight, but a lack of rules. And if there's not rules that they know, here's how we follow them, all of this is going to get really fucked up. And I mean, more fucked up than it is. The whole of Operation Lonestar is one big clusterfuck. But specifically here, this is a way that's really going to it hurts. It hurts. If you're a person who believes that we need a hardened border, this hurts that. I personally, as always, believe immigration should take 20 minutes. Here's a social security card. Go pay your taxes. But if you believe in a hardened border, this fucks that up because you'd have people who are not doing it right. They're not being given the correct way to do things. They're not given the correct tools to do them, training, anything like that, and then it's just all going to kind of go out the window. And it becomes even worse down there. Is the concern that I see.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like we might get attacked by some people on the right for reporting this story. And it's important to keep in mind that like these rules are also constraining, having tough border enforcement. If there are clearer rules, there might be clearer rules that allow things like this to happen. Because again, these guys are in a state law enforcement capacity when they're on state duty. They just don't know their guidelines because of that. And all they want is a clearer set of rules.
Yeah. Again, please just give us the book, the manual that says do X, Y, and Z. And so we know what to do. We do X, Y, and Z. I mean, again, the military wrote a book on like small infantry tactics that you can download off of the internet. We're very up on like, here's information on how to do stuff. Have at it. So hopefully somebody pulls their heads out of their asses. But I mean, I've followed Operation Lone Star since 2001, reading stuff from you and other people, and I think a head in the ass is really the way that this operates currently. Like if anybody pulled their heads out of their asses, a lot of this would probably go away pretty quickly, because very very unnecessary to harass a bunch of people who are just trying to come to America for a better life. And who can blame them? It's nice here. We've got Coca-Colas and
yeah, I think the take-home message here I want to leave people with is unprecedented missions create unprecedented problems. And this is our chance to understand them and address them in an era where use of the Guard by their governors is set to just increase. Operation Lone Star is a blueprint. And if we don't figure out what those troops can and can't do, these same gray areas are going to exist tomorrow.
Davis, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find you?
Oh, God. I'm on the app formerly known as Bird App Hell, because I can't kick it because it scratches some corner of my brain that I can't otherwise. Otherwise, you can find me on Army Times, Military Times, any cursed permutation of all of our sub brands, and maybe even in person if you frequent Atlanta.
Atlanta. I'm not going there anytime soon, but I'll if I do, I'll let you know. Thank you so much, Davis, for coming on. Everybody else, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.